shame on Canada. We need to cut ties with China. And we need to cut ties completely. Beijing has been a rogue authoritarian regime with one objective, and that is to grow their empire. That's what distinguishes Taiwan, Canada, and China. In Taiwan, in Canada, you can say what you think. You can think what you say. And of course, we as parliamentarians benefited a lot by understanding the complexity of the geopolitical crisis that Taiwan is facing, being next door to what I consider the world's most flagrant authoritarian regime. And what we have in Beijing is a bunch of dictators who are using capitalism, but they're using our free market because we've been stupid for 30, 40 years to get rich at our expense, so our workers lost their jobs. Governments lost revenue.
Thank you, Senator胡萨科斯, for taking this time. Senator, you led a Senate delegation to Taiwan just last month. What did you see there that you don't think most Canadians understand?
A wonderful country, a wonderful democracy, a wonderful people, an island of 24 million people who have built a wonderful economy, a wonderful society. Canadians, we live we're very fortunate in some ways because we're isolated in the world. I always say that God has given Canada 4 gifts. We're bordered by 3 oceans and the United States of America, one of the great free democratic states. But there's many countries in the world that don't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury to be bordered next to countries that have the same values, the same principles, the same system of government. There's many places in the world that are confronted on a daily basis by tyranny, by authoritarianism, and they have to fight on a daily basis to defend their democracy. I had been to Taiwan before. For my other 8 colleagues, it was their first trip, and I think it was eye-opening for them to see what Taiwan is all about. Because it's one thing to read about it in the newspapers, it's another thing to visit it on the ground. And we had many meetings. We had meetings with the Ministry of Security, Foreign Affairs, Health, Environment, Agriculture. We were fortunate to have a long discussion with the Vice President where she got to put on the table the concerns of the people and the government of Taiwan.
When we are talking here, the conservative MP Michael Chong right now in Taiwan, and China seems like very unhappy about that. What's your view on that?
Well, look, my view is I don't care what China is. At the end of the day, we've been unhappy with the behavior of Beijing towards Taiwan, towards our democracy, towards our friends and allies around the world. Let's be clear here, this is a regime that engages in intellectual espionage, transnational repression of Canadians of Chinese descent that live in this country, who tell them what to think, how to vote, what to do. That's not who we are in Canada. We're a free society. We value our democracy. And you know what, Terence, you were born in Beijing. My parents immigrated to Canada from Greece back in the 1950s. It doesn't matter in Canada where you come from, it's where we go as a collectivity. But we all value our freedom, our democracy, our right to say what we want to say. And if we want to criticize our government, it's our right to criticize it. If we want to applaud and compliment decisions of our government, it's our right to do so. What we're doing here is having an exchange on geopolitical issues. We have the right to do it freely. So at the end of the day, when we have a leader, a parliamentarian, elected parliamentarian from Canada, and Michael Chong, that goes to Beijing with a delegation of parliamentarians, it's not up to the Beijing regime to tell us what to do or what not to do. If we want to support Taiwan because we agree with their values, with their principles, if we want to defend democracy against authoritarianism, it's Michael Chong's constitutional right in this country. That's what distinguishes Taiwan, Canada, and China. In Taiwan, in Canada, you can say what you think. You can think what you say. That's a right that we sometimes take for granted. In Canada, not too long ago, people lost their lives fighting for that democratic right.
When you talk to Canadians, especially the people who have never thought about Taiwan in their lives, how do you explain that, why this matter to them?
Many things. Like I said earlier, Canada is a little bit isolated from the world, so I was privileged enough to go now to Taiwan on 2 occasions and see what was going on. So I'm a little bit of a conduit. I'm able to go back to the people of my constituency in the province of Quebec, Montreal. Today we're in Toronto, and I firsthand can talk about how Taiwan is a great democracy, how that small little island with a small population of people with freedom and democracy and respect for international rule of law have built a wonderful economy, a world leader in semiconductors, but not just semiconductors. We all talk about semiconductors because they're so important in today's technological world. But Taiwan has become a leader in so many aspects, and they've grown that economy. And they're becoming an important part of our supply chain here in Canada, the United States, and in Europe. And the message I have for Canadians, we have spent far too many years economically engaging with Beijing. And that relationship has brought us what? Beijing sells Canada over $60 billion a year of goods. We sell back to Beijing $30 billion. You don't have to be a brilliant businessman to see the inequity in that relationship. Over just a decade, China has benefited by over $300 billion of a trade deficit at the expense of our Canadian economy. Furthermore, they arrest Canadian citizens with no due process. Furthermore, they have no respect for environmental policy. Furthermore, they have no standards when it comes to labor policy. Furthermore, they devalue their currency compared to what we do here in Canada, the United States, and in the free Western world, where we believe in trade being based on standards, environmental standards, labor standards, financial standards, international rule of law, justice, where you don't charge somebody like they did with the 2 Michaels on trumped up charges just in order to reciprocate legitimate charges that one of the Huawei executives were facing here in Canada and the United States. Beijing has been a rogue authoritarian regime with one objective, and that is to grow their empire. What we want to do in Canada, it doesn't matter, like I said, as a Canadian where we come from, is we want to create a just society, a free country where rights are rights are rights, and more importantly, grow our economy, but grow it not at the expense of our environment, not at the expense of slave labor, not at the expense of taking away religious rights from people. So when I went to Taiwan, it was refreshing to see Chinese people living in freedom and flourishing. You know what struck me, because many years ago I had the opportunity to visit mainland China, and what I saw when I visited Taiwan are culturally the same people, but with a different spirit. The biggest thing I saw is the spirit in Taiwan is free, innovative, dynamic, warm, and open.
And happy.
Ultimately, when you have all those elements as a human being, you live happy. Nothing beats freedom, innovation, right? And when I went to mainland China, I saw a boot at the throat of people. I saw insularism, when people were insular, they wouldn't express themselves. You just sensed, it was palpable, the lack of freedom in mainland China, how everything was rigid.
You've spoken on the Senate floor about the 2 Michaels.
Yes.
You just mentioned about the election interference, about the Chinese police stations operating on Canadian soil. So when you connect those dots, what's the picture you see?
Well, the picture I see is something very, very nefarious and dangerous for our Canadian government, Canadian institutions, and our Canadian people. Both, doesn't matter what community they come from. But number one, I'm very concerned as a parliamentarian about our Chinese-Canadian community that's being intimidated right here on Canadian land and soil. Mainland Chinese that have fled mainland China and want to come to Canada and do their business here, and they want to do it in peace. And for a variety of reasons, somehow, the Chinese state considers these people their assets. They're not assets. Canadians are Canadians. Doesn't matter, like I said, if you have Chinese background, I'm of Greek background. Many Canadians are the English sphere of the world. Others are French Canadian. Doesn't matter. We all came to Canada wanting to receive the promise of Canada, freedom, of democracy, of opportunity. So when we see a situation where 2 Canadian citizens got illegally imprisoned, in the most brutal way, and we're held as a negotiating chip, as leverage. That is, it is beyond unacceptable, beyond unacceptable.
You know, I have some relatives visiting me in Toronto, and when they learn I'm doing what I'm doing right now, and they are really concerned. They say you should be less critical of the Chinese government, because they fear that one day if I go back, I will be in trouble, or maybe even here in Canada, I will be in trouble. Right? That's the fear they have.
It's terrible. Can you imagine living in that state, where everything you say and think will be determined by trying to please your government? What Canadian for a second would find that normal? I'm a parliamentarian. I'm in the Senate of Canada. My job is to hold the government to account. If every time I open my mouth, I worry about upsetting Prime Minister Carney, what kind of a country do we live in? And thank God we have leaders like Prime Minister Carney, and before him, other prime ministers. I had the privilege of working under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who always said the job of a parliamentarian is to represent their people, nobody else. And when you apply to be Prime Minister of Canada, you know what comes with that job is criticism. And that criticism is an important part in the democracy of arriving to the best possible public positions. So I just find it unacceptable what's going on in Beijing. It's been going on for decades. They do not share our values. So my biggest concern, and why many say, why are you such an anti-Beijing advocate? And it's very simple. I don't want to be trading or dealing with a group of individuals that are not aligned on my values of free enterprise. Free enterprise doesn't mean capitalism under authoritarian control. Free enterprise means capitalism under freedom, where there's competition, where if you manufacture product A, somebody else has the right to manufacture product A, and there's competition to make the best product at the most competitive price. That's free enterprise. Free enterprise in doing trade with an ally, I want to trade with an ally who cares as much about the environment as we Canadians do. If we combine the CO2 emissions and the pollutants that come out of the United States, Canada, the EU, and Australia, Beijing produces more than 2 times the amount of CO2 pollutants than all those economies combined. Yet, we've allowed Beijing to get rich by having unfettered access and open market to the richest middle class Western democratic markets, North America, EU, and Australia. And I ask myself, why? Why are we doing business with a country that doesn't respect environmental laws, doesn't respect labor laws, doesn't have a free and just system of justice? Why do we deal with that country? No respect for international rule of law. And then you have little Taiwan, small little island right off the coast, which Beijing on a daily basis intimidates. And they have democracy. They have environmental policies similar to ours. They have labor laws. They have freedom of expression, respect of international rule of law. Why aren't we dealing more with a country like that instead of being intimidated by Beijing and their various conditions? We have MPs delegations going to Taiwan to get upset. Senator Husakos, I say that we should have Taiwan recognized by the World Health Organization. Beijing gets upset. Worry about your business. Let Taiwan worry about its business. Let Canada worry about its business. And let's worry about aligning ourselves on public policy and values so everything can work nicely.
I would not say that if Taiwan falls, of course we don't want that to happen. And if Beijing achieves what it says it wants, what does that mean for Canada, for Canadian sovereignty, Canadian business, and the Canadian citizens?
It means terrible things. Number one, we will have a dictatorship that will become more emboldened than ever before. If that ever happens, which is the worst case scenario, it will never happen. But let's assume I'll assume the question being legitimate, but it's a terrible hypothesis. It'll be a big blow for democracy. It'll be a huge blow for economies of the world, because today Taiwan is a key component in our supply chain in terms of semiconductor technology that is at the core of everything we do in terms of microchips, what we produce in terms of every sector imaginable. So the impact would be catastrophic for Canada, catastrophic for North America, catastrophic for the Western economic world. Not to mention for the fact that I think if that would happen, it brings into question the security of the whole Asia Pacific democratic countries, of South Korea, Japan, all of them. Like, if Taiwan falls, who's next? And I keep telling our Canadian friends, democracy is our number one asset in Canada. We have to protect it at all costs. That includes our economy, our political institutions, and our citizens and their rights. And this belief that what's happening in, the Middle East or Ukraine or Taiwan is so far away is wrong. Because today it's a distance away. But tomorrow, we've learned from the history of mankind that these dictatorships, they never stop. Hitler didn't stop at Poland, right? The Soviet Union showed that they didn't want to, stop in a particular point. Expansionism is expansionism, and dictators always want to expand.
You remind me of recently, the President Trump said that Taiwan is too far and is too small when he was flying back from Beijing. Yeah, but that's not true. Yeah, but if Taiwan is too far away, what about Iran?
Taiwan is not far away. Like I said, what Taiwan builds and what Taiwan trades and what Taiwan has, we have it in our cars, we have it in our cell phones, we have it in our computers, we have it in our every component imaginable, air conditioning systems in this country.
Defense.
Every aspect. Taiwan, not only it is everywhere, omnipresent in our society. What I'm saying is we need more of Taiwan in North America, and we need less of Beijing. Beijing is a tyrant. Beijing is like dealing with the mafia. They come, they give you something because they want 10 things in return. It's not a fair relationship. And when you deal with the mafia, you never, ever survive. They will kill you and take what you have. That is the way Beijing works. Every time we've seen it in trade negotiations, in technological exchanges. When's the last time that Beijing developed a piece of technology that they gave to Canada? Said, here, take it. Remember a company? You're too young, Terrence. But there was a company in Canada called Nortel. Nortel was the world leader in telecommunication. We know today, after the fact, that Beijing came in, they used espionage, other forms, illicit forms, and they siphoned out that technology to the point where they killed the company. China engages on a daily basis in intellectual property thievery. Doesn't matter if it's technology and so on and so forth. We've seen it all over the world. It's part of their policy. The United Front, they invest billions of dollars in places like Canada, United States, Europe, in order to infiltrate our democracies in terms of institutions. Our own parliamentary systems have been infiltrated by Beijing. They're not infiltrating us because they want to keep an eye on us. Because if you want to keep an eye on our democracies, all you got to do is read the news, because we have free media. And we have now even better than free media. We have outlets like yourselves with millions of followers all over the world that are standing here and having a free conversation like two individuals, Canadian citizens, and we're not afraid to broach any subject matter. So you put all those facts on the table, Canadians should be very concerned. We need to wake up, not about the threats of China, because if Canadians are not aware today, that means they've been sleeping on the switch. It's nice to go to the dollar store and to buy things made in China that are cheap, But you got to ask yourself the question, at what expense? In Canada, we have essentially exported our Canadian economy over the last 50 years to China. In exchange for what? Some cheaper goods? Yeah. A trade imbalance, like I said, which is in the favor of Beijing in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And in exchange, the thank you we get is they come to our land, they intimidate Canadian citizens, they engage in espionage, they threaten Canadian politicians when we want to deal with free democratic states. Unacceptable.
You are so right. They don't really just monitor you. They want to control you. Not only in China, they want to control people. They even want to control people around the world.
And what's even worse is Canadian entrepreneurs and companies for decades have been going to China because they go there. Let's be clear, and I'm repeating this because it's worth repeating for your audience to know. When North American business people go to China, they go there because they want to break environmental laws they can't break here. They want to break labor laws they can't break here. And they think if you break all these laws and you cut all these corners, you're going to make more profits. Maybe you will. But what they don't understand is the government in Beijing wants the relationship to be one-sided. And when they utilize your technology, they take access of your marketplace, they'll ask you to leave. And when they ask you to leave, your pockets are going to be more empty than what they were when you came in there to start your business.
You came back from Taipei 6 weeks ago, and if you could put one message in front of every Canadian about Taiwan, what would that be?
Like I said at the outset of this interview, great people, innovative, free, creative, warm, happy, generous. They want to be part of our Western democratic incubator. You know, democracy is relatively new idea. It started in my parents' homeland in Greece thousands of years ago. And it has had peaks and valleys. And democracy is at a precarious stage. We've had authoritarianism and dictatorships flourish in the world and the history of mankind far more than democracy has, right? We've had instances where democracy didn't exist in any form for centuries in this world. So the message I have to all of us that live in free and democratic states, and if you look at the membership of the United Nations, we're very few countries. We shouldn't close our eyes and bury our sand and pretend dictatorships are a faraway problem, because that problem can easily come. So the message I have for Canadians is Taiwan is free, democratic, rule of law, system of justice, and it deserves our cooperation. It deserves our defense against any authoritarianism, because like I said, in the history of mankind, authoritarianism has proven to be like cancer. It spreads, right? If you don't eradicate the cancer at its source, it'll eat up your whole body. And that's what authoritarianism is. That's what Iran is. That's what Beijing is. All these countries that don't have true freedom, they intimidate the media, they intimidate their opposition, like Russia, like Erdogan in Turkey does very often. And it's funny, who does Beijing cooperate with? These are the countries they cooperate with. Countries that sponsor terrorism, countries that are against democracy and against freedom. They support Cuba, they support Russia. These are the countries they support.
I'm very excited to take some of the Canadian journalists to the Kinmen front line against China. That's going to be very exciting.
And it's going to be great, and hopefully Canadian journalists will expand the miracle, I call it, the economic political miracle of Taiwan, and give the information required so Canadians can know what's going on around the world. Being educated and knowledgeable makes you put things in perspective, both in your country and around the world.
Now Taiwan is one of the top trading partner with Canada. And Taiwan is willing to sign the free trade deal with Canada and all other nations. What's stopping Canada to do that?
Well, clearly, look, I agree with Prime Minister Carney. We need to diversify our trade. We're in a bit of a skirmish right now with our American friends and Donald Trump over tariffs and free trade, and so on and so forth. But Canadians have to never forget, the amount of trade we do with our best friend and ally, the United States, can never be compensated by any amount of diversification. Not with Indonesia, not with Middle Eastern countries, but certainly not with China. There's no amount of trade with China that can create equilibrium of cutting ties with the United States of America. So Mark Carney, Prime Minister Carney and the Liberals have to get over this. And number two, for all the reasons we highlighted in our conversation today, we need to send a message clearly to China. If you don't align yourself with the standards that we have on freedom, on environmental issues, on labor, law, like all the list, I'm repeating it because it's worth repeating, we need to cut ties with China. And we need to cut ties completely. Because ultimately, the answer to your question is, China's always leveraging our dependency on their supply chain. And they're always leveraging that to intimidate Canada to take certain decisions. So that's why we haven't signed an important trade agreement between Canada and Taiwan. And what I'm saying is our response to China and Beijing should be to cut further ties with them and to enhance ties with countries like Taiwan. Anywhere in the world where we're dealing right now with authoritarian regimes, shame on Canada. Shame on Canada, because we should not be trading with any nation, especially a nation that has a complete surplus and a net benefit of $2 for every one that we trade for. So the biggest potential loser, if we put the squeeze on Beijing, is Beijing. Yes, we're going to lose some trade because they're going to retaliate on the $30 billion of agricultural goods that we sell to them. We sell them food, beef, pork, seafood, potash, wheat. We know all that. What do they sell us for $60 billion? What do they sell us? Plastics?
Now some EVs.
Some EVs. And my point is, all the things they sell us, we can buy from other places. I have an idea. We can do better than that. We can start making some of those things like we used to make them back here in Canada. And you know what? They might cost a little bit more, but we're going to create an economy that we exported 40, 50 years ago to China, and they're benefiting at our expense. Furthermore, and very importantly here, when it's all said and done, you think a regime like China, who's trying to feed 1.4 billion people, are going to afford for a long time not to buy Canadian pork, Canadian beef, Canadian seafood? My point is, what we sell them is essential for survival. What they sell us, we should be making back here in Canada anyways, and keeping that $60 billion of cash flow, Canadian cash flow that goes to the pockets of the Beijing dictator in the Canadian economy. All the things being made today in Beijing, in Xinjiang, in China, we used to make them here in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Regina. We used to make all those things. Everything from clothes to plastic goods to you name the item, to toasters. We used to make all those things in Canada. So the Canadian economy went from being an industrial manufacturing powerhouse in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to becoming today a service-based economy. If you take away from our economy our agricultural goods, our natural resources, which we're not exploiting to their full capacity, and you take away the service sector, we don't make anything in Canada anymore. Canada used to be a heavily industrial manufacturing capacity country. We don't make anything anymore. We just buy things. The only trade agreement in the world where Canada has a surplus in trade, which basically means we sell more to them than we buy, is the United States of America.
That's why we have free healthcare.
We have the freest healthcare, free education. There is no arguing that we have benefited immensely from that deal. But if you look at the relationship between Canada and Beijing and China, they laugh at us. They laugh at us all the way to the bank. It's not a relationship. Relationship is give and take. I give you things, you give me things, we buy and sell things, and we grow our economies together. We align, we partner up on values, on principles, on goals, objectives, rules. In the NHL, in Major League Baseball, and in the NBA, there's a reason why there's rules functioning and governing these professional leagues. Because if there wasn't rules, it would be survival of the biggest, the strongest, the biggest markets, so on and so on. You wouldn't have a league anymore. So there's a rule about how they draft players to make it fair. There's rules in terms of even revenue sharing in some leagues. There's rules of how the game is played, both from a governance perspective and so on. Why? To create an even playing field. And what we have in Beijing is a bunch of dictators who are using capitalism, but they're using our free market because we've been stupid for 30, 40 years to get rich at our expense, at our working. So our workers lost their jobs. Governments lost revenue. There are some shareholders in corporations in North America that got wealthy because they had cheap labor, environmental rules, like we said in Beijing. It was good for a period of time. But now we're starting to discover, wait a second. You know, it's not fair. It's not just. It's not equitable. And at the end of the exercise, Beijing is going to take those shareholders and these business people who thought they were being clever, and they're going to say, we don't recognize you anymore. The plant that you helped us build in Beijing doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to us. So we have, when that happens, and it's been happening, we're losers on every front. Look at what China has done in terms of energy capacity. They created renewable energy. They're ahead of North America today. They've surpassed us when it comes to green technology, renewable energy. But to produce renewable energy, you need to burn coal. You need to burn fossil fuels. So while we don't do that here in Canada, Beijing and China, they've been doing because there's no regulations. They burn coal like there's no tomorrow. They frack and they pollute in the environment like there's no tomorrow. Here in Canada, we're trying to save the world when we make for 1% of the pollution that we garner out there. And we're killing our energy sector. So we're not going to produce ethical and clean oil here. We're not going to produce coal-fired plants here, which we do in North America cleaner because we use actual environmental standards even when we do coal production compared to what they do in Beijing. We're not going to do any of that. We're going to let them do that. So they've surpassed us in energy capacity, both fossil fuel, coal. They've surpassed us in energy. Why? Because they do things we don't do here in this country. What do you need to be a world leader in EVs? You need cobalt, right? You need lithium. You need all kinds of minerals that need to be what? Mined from the earth. So we have regulation and red tape in Canada preventing mining in Canada, where we prevent the growth of lithium mines and so on and so forth. We tolerate the cobalt mining that's going on in places like the Congo using child labor. Also, China can produce EVs without respecting any of these environmental standards that I just highlighted, and then they sell it back to us Canadians. And as dummies, we sign deals to subsidize, bring their cars in here, while we know they have no religious freedom, while we know they threaten a country that respects all the things I just highlighted, like Taiwan and other geopolitical players in the Asia Pacific. So I've gone on, Terence, a lot, given a lot of information, but that is why I've come to the conclusion as a parliamentarian that the Canadian government has leverage on China, not the other way around. It's not China who has leverage on us. And we have to send a message. It's clear. You want to continue to benefit from the Canadian market and the relationship with us here in Canada, you change. And if you don't change, there are consequences. It would be really wonderful if we had world leadership amongst democracies where we can do that in one voice. Where North America, Australia, Commonwealth countries, European countries would align themselves on this message and say to China, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate it any longer.
Thank you, Senator. It's really great pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much.